So 9 years ago, my sister-in-law, Karina, sustained a spinal cord injury in a car accident. And that was my introduction to the world of disability, to the world of medical supplies. And it was largely in response to a lot of her experiences living with the spinal cord injury that I decided to start Aurie. So I'm Souvik, I'm the CEO of Aurie. Our mission there is to prevent life-threatening infections for intermittent catheter users. For those of you who are unfamiliar, these are what intermittent catheters look like. There are around 600,000 people in the US who have to use between 6 and 8 of these every single day. And the problem with these devices is that they cause urinary tract infections. And they're a leading cause of death for people living with spinal cord injury and other intermittent catheter users. And with these standard catheters, which are really not more complicated than plastic straws, there's a 50% annual chance of a severe complicated UTI. And your average user, in other words, will experience 1 to 2 complicated UTIs in a year. But they're still the standard of care because they're $2 each, and so they cost just about $5,000 a year. There are safer no-touch catheters that reduce infections by over 30%, but they're too expensive for widespread coverage. Their features like insertion sleeves and introducer tips help reduce contact contamination. That's how they work and improve outcomes. But at close to $8 a piece, they're 4 times as expensive as the standard of care and covered for less than 5% of people who have Medicare coverage. And that's where we come in. So we have developed a catheterization system that utilizes a tech-enabled approach to make intermittent catheterization safer, more convenient, and more sustainable. We've designed our own reusable no-touch catheters, which with the same features that help reduce infections, except ours are reusable with this somewhat portable catheter washer disinfector, which completely automates the cleaning, disinfection, and lubrication of catheters between uses using tap water and prepackaged cleaning supplies. And when we've surveyed catheter users, 81% have said that they're at least interested in trying, if not completely switching over to the Aurie system. And the reason why is because we provide a cost-effective means to reduce urinary tract infections. With our reusable system, we can provide the same infection control features as the $20,000 catheters at the $5,000 a year price point as standard single-use catheters. We've worked with the University of Notre Dame to show that we could repeatedly clean and disinfect catheters. The graph on the left shows kind of the control sample in gray, which is how many pathogens were on the catheter before we cleaned and disinfected it. And then these tiny boxes in white are how many were left after. And this was done over 101 times. And we've built prototypes. We're starting FDA testing. We're planning to submit in the first half of next year. We have 5 issued patents. We have 2 patents that are currently pending and additional planned submissions. We have FDA sign-off on our testing strategy. They gave us the Safer Technologies designation, which gives us an expedited review timeline. Our regulatory team includes someone who ran the urological devices group at the FDA for 7 years. So we're in good hands as far as that's concerned. And altogether, we have 75 years of healthcare experience. Between all of us, we've commercialized 17 medical devices and sold over $50 million in durable medical equipment. We've raised $7.5 million in venture capital, $3.4 million in grant funding, including from the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Disability. And we are in the process, we've raised our $5 million seed round. We're raising more money now just because the macroeconomic environment's kind of crap right now. But this money will help us finish out testing, submit to the FDA, and start building commercial partnerships. And at the heart of what we're doing is we're building a human-centered consumer medical device company. Especially in the world of disability, most of the research funding is allocated towards finding the cure for spinal cord injury or spina bifida. The place in the innovation ecosystem that we seek to fill is supporting innovations that impact people's health and quality of life in the here and now, in the short term, because we've been waiting for a cure for spinal cord injury for the last 50 years. And we're always looking to connect with like-minded investors and innovators. And so this is our 5-minute pitch. This is what we deliver to investors at pitch competitions to give a brief overview of the work that we do. And everything in this presentation is true, right? No lies, like this is like where we are, but I think the investor pitch is designed and engineered to be a snapshot of the furthest point that we've made it to, and it doesn't showcase all of the decisions and all of the, frankly speaking, turmoil that happens behind the scenes. And so in today's talk, that's really my goal, is to kind of peel back the layers of the onion and really share what it was like to get from my thesis product that I designed like in this classroom and presented at the SVA Theater to where we are today. And just to start out and make sure that we're all on the same page, I wanted to quote a song that I listen to sometimes. It's kind of modeled after a graduation speech. It was never actually delivered as a graduation speech. It's kind of a conceit or whatever, but the song goes, "Wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it, because the long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proven by scientists, and the rest of my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience." Everything that I'm about to talk about is sample size of one. It's one person's experience, so none of this is meant to be like statistically significant or anything like that. It's just like what I have noticed in my own experiences since grad school. But to start the story, I think we need to back all the way up. So after I graduated from college, I was working at JP Morgan as a trader on Wall Street in a trading floor that looked pretty similar to this, maybe like a little bit less white, and not in terms of race, just in terms of like the colors and stuff. And I realized at one point that I was spending 11 hours a day at work. So I was spending approximately 50% of my waking life at work. And that by itself wasn't a bad thing. But it was just like, should I be spending half of my life doing finance in particular? And that was like a question that I really grappled with, especially because it was never my dream to work in finance. And I felt like it was all too possible for me to wake up at 55 in the same exact seat, doing the same exact thing. And at the time, you know, this is aging me a little bit, but the iPhone had been out for 5 years. And so there are all these retrospectives about the impact of the iPhone on personal computing. All of the technology behind it had existed before in the form of Palm Pilots and other smartphones, but it wasn't until the iPhone came around that people were more likely to access the internet through a device like an iPhone than a device like a laptop. And to me, what that pointed to was this idea of design being this toolkit to create positive change. And so I started looking for different programs to apply to, because I really wanted to learn how to harness that methodology myself and to use my working life as a way to create positive change in the world, which is the sort of idealistic and overly ambitious thing that someone in their early 20s is bound to think, right? And so I decided to join POD. I was excited. I put in my notice at work. And like I said earlier, someone I really cared about was in a car accident. And so I had spent the 2 weeks before grad school in acute inpatient spinal cord injury rehab in a hospital in California, and had to make a decision: do I go to graduate school or not? And I ultimately ended up deciding to come to graduate school, but I kind of resolved something for myself, and it was basically, you know, if I had believed that design could change lives, it had to be able to help change how Karina felt about her particular circumstance and the situation that she found herself living in. And as a corollary to that, I decided when I came to grad school, everything that I designed had to have some basis in reality, had to have, you know, function by the laws of physics. Basically, my design process was really oriented towards doing a lot of upfront research about what is and isn't possible. And so for a thesis, I tried to learn everything I could about the spinal cord and spinal cord injuries, and I ended up, as you all know, designing a series of interventions. The first was an interactive experience. I basically got recordings of people talking about the physical sensation of paralysis, because it doesn't feel like the absence of feeling. It actually, there's a specific pain associated with it in some cases. And basically took those recordings and played them over an adaptive yoga session that was designed to help people get in tune with their own bodies. I created an app that would help people connect to peers going through the same rehabilitation experience that they were going through, that used voice recognition to identify what emotional state they were in so that it could offer more resources in times of need. I created a service called Test Drive, which basically allowed people to sell and lease used durable medical equipment so that they didn't have to use their insurance to pay for a new wheelchair, because insurance only covers one wheelchair every 5 or 6 years. And lastly, I learned a lot about catheters. I learned everything that I told you earlier about them. 4 to 6 people are using them every single day, 4 to 6 to 8 times a day. They're all single use. Some people reuse them. And actually, I was on the phone with Karina, and she basically told me about a UTI that she had gotten because she was reusing her catheters because of insurance coverage. And she literally said to me, it would change my life if you could create a product that would help me sterilize my catheters. And that's basically what I tried to do in my thesis. I created this product, which you can't see particularly well in the screenshot, but the bathroom floor should be familiar. It's the men's bathroom here. And basically, this product uses UV light to sterilize catheters after they've been used to kill all the germs on them and to basically make them safe for use. And while I was here at POD, I think I started to conceptualize design as occupying the space between engineering and art. If engineering solves problems and art asks questions, I think design is uniquely able to answer the questions of what problems should we solve and how should we go about solving them. And I think the other thing that I learned is, try as I might, I always find myself on this part, towards the engineering side of this spectrum. I would love to, I have classmates whose work inspires me. I've just never managed to move further right. And then in terms of thinking about this spectrum and then the quantities of output that are created by these practices, I started to think of the work that we were doing in graduate school as developing concepts, kind of like that upfront development effort of identifying problems and how we should solve them. And oftentimes we're creating prototypes in really low quantities, right? We're 3D printing things, we're using the VFL, and it's a pretty long process to get it to the point where you could create thousands or millions of a single item. And so I think after graduate school, I was kind of like, well, what does it actually take? Now that I've designed these concepts, how do I get them all the way over to the left? And so while I was working on thesis during Design Match, I interviewed with Johnson & Johnson Design for the position of Healthcare Solutions Senior Analyst. And if you're anything like me, that means nothing. It's just words. And so what I came to find out was Healthcare Solutions kind of sat at the intersection of product management and design. And that was kind of a bummer because I came to design school wanting to be a designer. That's why I came to Products of Design. And it felt kind of like a cop-out that the first job out of grad school wouldn't be a pure design role. But I justified it because I was in thesis and I did not want to spend a ton of time looking for jobs. And actually, J&J ended up being a really interesting place to really understand how a large corporate looks at the product development process. There were a couple of different projects that I worked on. I think the thing that was really, truly crazy about Johnson & Johnson is just the level of impact, because when something goes through J&J, it can impact billions of people. And so the question of how does a company like Johnson & Johnson innovate? And J&J is a pretty old company. I don't know if it's totally synonymous with innovation in most people's minds, but for medical technologies, it does have a huge impact. And what I learned while I was at J&J was it does this by acquiring startups and scaling them. It's the role of the startup to really take an idea and demonstrate that there's demand for it, demonstrate that a new product should belong in the world, and then a J&J comes along and scoops them up and helps them scale. And that brings us to acquisition drivers. What is needed to introduce a new product, right? What gets a company like J&J excited? And this is really ignorant of me, but I think when I graduated, I was just like, oh yeah, designers, they come up with ideas, and then we talk to people about our ideas, and then someone else thinks it's a great idea, and then they do it, right? Like, we're like that front part of the process. We're just like generating the concepts, and then other teams get assembled. And that's actually not true at all, right? There are some very specific things that companies like J&J are looking for when they're looking for ideas to acquire, whether or not something can exist in the real world. You need an integrated looks like prototype. You need to have intellectual property, otherwise J&J, frankly, is probably going to screw you over. You need regulatory clearance, or at least a path towards getting FDA approval if you're a medical device. And then lastly, but I think the most important thing, you need evidence that people want the thing that you are making. And this is the hardest thing to do as a medical device, because you're legally not allowed to assess this until you have FDA approval. And so as I was at Johnson & Johnson, I was also taking part in the SVA ground floor incubator. So this was a program that lasted for a couple of years up until the pandemic. It started right after I graduated from POD. And it was really lucky that the timing worked out that way, because I can say with 100% certainty, if it wasn't for the incubator and Sinclair's support throughout that process, like, I would not have done any of the subsequent steps to like try to get Aurie off the ground. But what it was, you know, we were receiving lectures like on a bi-weekly basis from different design entrepreneurs, and then we were also learning in modules about the different elements that it takes to launch a business. And so at the end of this experience, I had a pitch deck, and we had the pitch night actually right here in this very room, I guess 6.5 years ago. And based off of that pitch deck, I felt like I had enough done that I could start talking to other people about my work in a compelling way. And so I was thinking about this kind of transition from concepts to products and thinking, you know, what does it take? And I felt at the end of ground floor, like, I have enough line of sight to what it takes, and so let me try to do this myself. So while I was at J&J, I found a co-founder. We created a company, we filed a provisional patent, and we had a bunch of quick wins in the beginning. We won a pitch competition, won $15,000. We filed our provisional patent. We got into an accelerator program. My soon-to-be ex-co-founder was also kind of pressuring me at the time. There was a lot of work, and it was probably the right time to leave, but he was basically being like, you know, you should probably quit J&J soon. We had raised a very small amount of funding, and we thought we had a simple product that would take 2 months to design, and that was 5 years ago. And I should also note, I was just like in a very privileged position. I still am. You know, I have a giant support system. I don't have to worry about visas or anything like that. I had saved up a bunch of money from Johnson & Johnson, so I thought I had enough to like be able to make a go at it, and not everyone gets that chance. So I think so that's how I like started and like took the plunge and like really went for trying to develop my thesis into an actual product. Now, I think the big question is, how do you start from that and then end up here? It's like a pretty massive change as far as design iterations go. And so I think you guys have probably seen this, but this is like actually the best metaphor that I have ever seen for the product development process. And it's actually like so comforting, because it means that everyone goes through this, that it's not just like me and my inexperience that led us down this path. So V1 is basically what I had designed in grad school. And at the end of the day, it was really like, it was one person's insight and one person's experiences that led me to design this product. And over the first couple of months of working on CathBuddy, which eventually became Aurie, there were a lot of other design iterations, but what you'll notice is they were never based off of user insight. The first design iteration was based off of the feedback from colleagues at Johnson & Johnson. The third version was based off of like going to the global grad show in Dubai and wanting like a spiffier design. We ended up talking to regulatory consultants at one point. They were like, you know, the FDA is never going to let you sell a standalone sterilizer because of the potential for abuse. So we're like, okay, great. I guess we're in the catheter making business too. And then the fifth iteration was basically from the input of my soon-to-be ex-co-founder, who was like, you know, it's easier to sterilize something if it's like in the same place all the time and we could deliver consistent sterilization doses to it. So just to be abundantly clear, we had gone through 5 design spins at this point, and we had talked to 0 additional users. And so the quick wins stopped coming as quickly. The decisions got murkier and harder. We were kind of like in the product development process, and my co-founder left after just like a bunch of disagreements. And it was kind of tempting to like be like, all right, we tried it, and now it's time to go back to an actual job. But I had already accepted investor capital at that point, and so it became as much about like bringing the product to fruition as it was about like being a good herald of the people's money that I took. And I also realized, you know, this is exactly what I learned at POD, is this part of the design process of creating a product that people actually need. And so I thought to myself, I know how to run a product development process. Let's go find users and talk to them. And of course, the next input wasn't actually from users. So we were also getting really smart, or somewhat smart, about the regulatory experience and pathway. We learned that the FDA has rules for cleaning and disinfecting medical devices. Who knew? We took those rules and then we started to test them with users. So we had a prototype and we were like, well, the FDA says you're supposed to clean things out. How do you feel about that? And one person was like, I would never clean catheters out in the sink of the bathroom at work. And so that was a thing. And then another input was we learned about no-touch catheters, how they impact infection rates, and how they're not widely available. And then like the value proposition started to crystallize. Reuse itself wasn't the value prop. It was making this unaffordable catheter affordable. That's what we wanted to do and reduce infections. And so we created this at-home 6 catheter capacity UVC sterilization device, still with manual cleaning, with a removable catheter insertion aid and sheath with automated UVC sterilization. This was version 6. This was also based off of the input of 1 additional user of the 9 that we talked about. And I think also the other thing, looking back, that we made a mistake on was we knew that cleaning had to be a process, and we just kind of like took the FDA's word for it that it had to be a manual cleaning process. And so we weren't quite thinking outside of the box enough with this version. And so then you know you're in a really bad spot when your industrial designer founder is doing microbio experiments. But basically we found lab space in Harlem. We were able to do some very preliminary experiments using UVC and just validating that it could clean through a catheter and completely disinfect those catheters. And initially the results were really good, but then subsequent results weren't as pretty. Like we were seeing growth, and this is because of things that people know about UVC. It's a wavelength of light, so if you block it with anything, it just stops having the ability to sterilize. It also destroys plastics. Like a lot of our catheter samples just like completely did not exist at the end of like the exposure to the light. And the FDA also did not recognize UVC as an official sterilization method. The FDA actually has like a list of everything that that has cleared use with them, and UVC is not on that list. And so then we had another choice. We were kind of like, well, we should probably use something that like the FDA recognizes. So that's autoclave sterilization on the bottom left. That's steam sterilization, kind of the gold standard that the FDA looks for. And then you have microwaves on the left, not officially recognized by the FDA, but people use them to sanitize baby bottles, and they're pretty widely available. So if someone's traveling, they could always like find a microwave in their hotel room. We ended up going with the sterilization route just because we wanted to, again, avoid any issues with the FDA. And we created this like tabletop version of a steam sterilizer that had the same catheter design as before. So again, we're now at 7 versions of the device, primarily informed by the regulatory pathway, the technical feasibility, and very limited user input, basically input from 2 users. And at around this time, so we had raised $65,000 from friends and family. In 2019, we got into an accelerator that gave us a $30,000 check. I had to live in Texas for a couple months, which was interesting. And I mean, no, it was actually pretty fun, but I gained a bunch of weight. And then in 2020, we were in the middle of raising what we were calling a seed round or an angel round. We were almost halfway through, and then COVID-19 happened, and all of a sudden no one was writing investor checks because no one knew if the world would exist 6 months from then. We had started working with external product development firms, you know, paying them tens of thousands of dollars, and we had to go to them and be like, hey, this is like really tough. Like, is there anything you could do? They agreed to like defer half of our payments, and they were really supportive about it, but it was just like a very tough situation. And then fortunately, we got into a spinal cord injury focused accelerator program that gave us some grant funding. The only issues were they were having trouble on funding on their side, so we almost like literally ran out of money where I was gonna have to like pay for bills out of my personal bank account, which is like tough to do when, you know, business expenses are on a whole other level. And then the other thing that happened with this accelerator program is we had like the mentor from hell, like insisted on 8 p.m. Friday night meetings that were 2 hours long, where he would tell me every reason why we would fail and would refuse to like brainstorm ways to help us succeed, like just like the worst. But then 4 things happened in somewhat quick succession. So we got a small business innovation research grant from the National Science Foundation for $256,000. We got $100,000 from the National Institute of Disability. Our first patent was approved. I should note about all of these things, we got rejected 3 times by the NIH. We got rejected once from the National Institute of Disability. Our patent came back and the patent examiner was like, this is not patentable. So like all of this is also just a screenshot because there's just so much failure baked into like what, like behind those words. And on top of all of this, like, you know, we're sharing this information with people that we've met along the way, and we got a term sheet for $750,000. So like basically in the span of 3 weeks, we went from like almost running out of money to like getting close to $1 million of working capital. But the relief didn't last, because as part of this accelerator program, we were doing this focus group with people living with spinal cord injuries. And the way that they had kind of like structured the experience for us in terms of like talking about the product and providing information about the product was like just not very good. But the focus group's results were even worse. This one user basically said like, there's some Call of Duty Modern Warfare that's calling my name. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't use this product. And so it was just like, it was supposed to be like this pivotal moment, this moment of triumph, and then we get these like really horrendous focus group results. And so it was just like another one of those moments where it's just like, what do I do? Because I had 2 choices. I had, on the one hand, everything I said about the focus group design was true. Like it wasn't a great setup to actually explain what the product did or what it was or why we thought it was a good idea. It was literally just like a video of the thing, and then they had people react. But then on the other hand, it was just like, you know, we just got money from investors and the federal government. We cannot spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building the wrong thing. And so then the decision I made was we have to go back to the users. And so we had received new info from the FDA that talked about other possibilities for safe reuse of catheters. So, and I'll also caveat like kind of the rest of the presentation. Most of the work that I'm going to share is not my own. It's like work that people created for the company. So take that with a grain of salt. So basically, we created 4 different concepts to test with 19 users through storyboards because, 1, we wanted something that we could quickly prototype and get high fidelity feedback on. But 2, it was COVID. We couldn't talk to anyone in person. So concept M is a completely manual concept. Concept S is a steam sterilization concept with like automated cleaning. Concept W is automated cleaning and chemical disinfection. And concept P is hot water pasteurization. So these are versions 8 to 11 of the product. And from this research, we started to tease out different primary use cases of catheters and for our system. And we learned that our users would either desire portability or they would desire routine in their day-to-day life with catheters. And that kind of lended itself to different modalities for how to clean and disinfect the catheters. The switch that happened here was that we weren't reacting to a single user's insight. We were instead trying to think of it as a whole and understand it holistically so that we could come up with like paradigms or patterns, rules about our users that we could make design decisions based off of. And so we decided to focus on the portability use case just because I felt that, one, Karina was definitely a portability user, and she was the reason I started the business in the first place. But two, if we can solve the needs of the people who want portability, we could probably get a lot of the people who want routine, whereas the opposite was not true. And so the next thing we did was we created 3 concepts based off of chemical disinfection that explored different ideas. A system that had bulk supplies that would fit into a backpack because a lot of people carry catheters in a backpack. We had a somewhat portable all-in-one system where you would have to swap out cleaning supplies, water, and batteries every time you used it. And then we had kind of a hybrid pencil case model. And I think this was the first time I started to breathe easier after the focus group results. I think about like 9 to 10 months had passed. But basically, we had gone through this whole process, and we just asked, like, generally, like, do you guys like these designs, or do you hate them? And 70% said that they were good designs that needed a few modifications. So that was like the first, like, okay, we can breathe a little bit. We're maybe going on the right path. We also asked them to like sort or put poker chips against each of the different concepts. And the pencil case design won. While all this was happening, I was going through design iterations because obviously we're not going to bring any of these to market. And I really thought the pencil case would win, I thought the all-in-one would win, but the pencil case ended up winning, but we had versions of all of them. And then even further on, we had in our next set of development partners develop these sketches for what the system could look like. And in the background of all of this, we're also doing technical work, right? So we're doing the testing at UND that I had mentioned. We're working with engineers to actually like build the unit. So this was kind of like the highest fidelity conceptual exploration that we had to date. So obviously we went with concept 6. And then we went into what we called the pre-alpha formative. So this was with 10 catheter users. We had a clickable UI prototype, and then we had a 3D printed model that they could interact with. And the very first call that I had tuned into, there was this guy with a thick Boston accent who was like, I don't know anyone who would use this thing. And it was horrible. Like, I was just like, all of that work. So like at this point, like a full year and change had passed. Like we had used all of the grant funding. We had used a lot of the investor capital. We're about to raise another round of funding. And this comes up. And I think what I learned was I have like this tendency of like zeroing in on like what a single user will say and just like fixating on it. And oftentimes it's like the most negative voice that's like the hardest to ignore. And what we ended up finding was that 7 out of 10 people would try the system when they were asked after handling the prototype and going through the clickable UI screens. 2 of them even asked if they could buy it. And that to us was really like the indicator that, okay, we have something that there is, like we've hit a minimum viable product. And of course, there are 3 out of 10 who would never, ever try it, no matter what you told them about it, which is fine. We don't need 100% of the overall market. And then, so then we created like this mostly works like, looks like model. We tested this along with actual IFUs with 8 catheter users, and it was pretty remarkably consistent. 6 out of 8 would try it. 2 out of 10 asked if they could buy it currently, and then 2 out of 8 would never try it. And we're on version 23 now. And then, of course, more design changes. We realized that we didn't have a place to put the filter, so we had to grow the entire system by another 1.5 inches. So that's versions 24 to 27. And along the way, we wanted to focus on portability, and now we have this system that isn't really portable. But I actually think that if we had started focused on the routine user, like the device would be even bigger than it is currently, right? So I'm actually like kind of glad that we started with the more extreme use case. We'll eventually try to work our way back to something that's portable, but based off of the results from these high fidelity human factor studies, we think we still have an MVP with that 20% of users who are asking whether or not they want to, or whether or not they could buy it. And so basically, since that first focus group, we've had human factor studies with 57 people, we've surveyed 434 people, and we've had one-on-one interviews with 120 people, all in service of just like trying to learn, how do people use intermittent catheters in their day-to-day? What issues can we help solve with our system? And who is our target customer? So I think like the big learning of that focus group experience was just like how important it is to get user feedback as early, as often, from as many people as possible. And how important it is to not just make decisions based off of like one or two people. It's really trying to like step back and see the patterns behind it. And even though we're like ostensibly like close to FDA submission, what you'll find is that this loop is like recursive. It's like a Mandelbrot set. So just this week, you know, this was me in SolidWorks, like this is a part of our system where the catheter seals. And it was me like in SolidWorks and McMaster just like looking at dimensions of magnets and trying to fit them into our design. And we're still going through that process. Like literally, yeah, each one of these curves represents its own world of complexity. Ultimately, at the end of the day, as I think about my role and our job as a startup, we're not here to produce the best reusable catheter system in the world. Like that is absolutely like not what our investors have invested in us for. Our job is to demonstrate that a reusable catheter system meets an unmet need and provides value for people. And so along the way, you know, I think back about, oh, and we have to do that as quickly as possible. I think back about what I had designed in my thesis, and I'm kind of like, it would be so nice to go back to that form factor, just like that slim, elegant, like pocketable device. And we could spend an infinite amount of money and an infinite amount of time, and we would get there eventually. But that is not why people have invested in us. That's not what we're supposed to do. What we have to do is we have to really understand what is our minimum viable product. And I think the thing that keeps me up at night is you don't actually know. Because all along the way, there are all these moments where you have to make these decisions of, do we spend, you know, do we delay our timeline and our FDA submission by 6 months? Or do we take the quote unquote easy way out and focus on launching a product? And you have all of these micro decisions. And at any point, the word viable can drop out of the description of what you're building. It could just become a minimum product. And I think the trick is like trying to really understand from your user research that line that you have to like really be careful about staying on, where your decisions don't impact the viability of the product. And eventually, you know, if this MVP is successful, we will have a smaller, more portable version of the system. We'll have a 6-inch catheter for women. We'll have different tip geometries. We'll have a version of the system for people with limited dexterity. We're even developing smart sensor-enabled catheters with different university partners that could detect UTIs, conceptually can detect UTIs before they even occur. But our first thing is getting that minimum viable product across the line. And then because, you know, I'm a graduate of this program, I also think about all the services that we could put on top of it. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if we had telemedicine-enabled catheter prescription renewals and automated replenishment orders and at-home testing and things like that? That's like the mindset that I think Alan has really instilled in all of us. This is just like, what, you know, how does this product can't exist in a vacuum? What are the other services? But again, you know, I think a big part of my experience and my responsibility right now is just like focusing on what is that critical element of the product that we can focus on to get to market. And then, you know, maybe if it takes off and we go through this product roadmap, maybe I can start looking at other parts of my thesis. You know, if I was right about the reusable catheter thing, maybe all this other stuff has potential too. But obviously I cannot put the cart before the horse. So yeah, this is a play on the products of design thing. I think in my current role, like, you know, there's a lot of stuff that I have to do. And frankly, like, I would say design is like less than 5% of my job. And it's hard not to like reflect on this entire process, like, cause you know, I literally like practiced for my thesis presentation here like 7 years ago, right? I think we would have been gearing up for like the thesis defense at the end of first semester. And you know, it's interesting because I went to design school to be a designer, and I wouldn't really call myself that now. And you know, on top of everything that I had to learn about product development and just everything about running a business, it was also like, I've never managed people before, and now I have a team, and so I have to do one-on-ones, and I've had to figure that out too. And so one thing that I like to ask my employees is, are you learning in your current role, and are you enjoying your job? And I think recently my COO asked me the same things. And obviously, yes, I am learning a ton in my current role. I would say like maybe not as much about design as I would have wanted. And honestly, like, if I like, enjoying my job is kind of a privilege that I don't really get to have because I made that decision to take investor capital. And so I have this responsibility now to kind of see everything through to the very end and see how far it takes me. And it's like at once like an amazing role because like who gets to do this kind of thing? But then on the other end of things, like I do stay up at night sometimes being like, well, if Aurie fails, like 75 to 95% of startups do, I don't think I could be hired as a designer after this. Like, I just like don't even know what kind of job I would look for. So Alan, I don't know if he still says this, but he used to say this to us a lot. The jobs that we're training you for haven't been created yet. And this is like the least helpful advice when you're in design school. Sorry, Alan, but it's just like, you know, you're so preoccupied with thesis, you're worried about getting a job after grad school, and there are so many things on your mind. You have to get visas and all this stuff. But ultimately, Alan's right, because like, you know, when I graduated in 2016, my current job hadn't been created yet. And that is the crazy thing about like the skill set that you guys get here at POD is just that it does become possible. It does in a lot of ways train you for like an experience like being a CEO, which is wild. But yeah, trust me on the sunscreen. That is my presentation. So I'd love to answer any questions.